A lot of the learning is around saying no. If that client isn't the right one for you, then it might mean in the short term a loss of revenue or a loss of, but sometimes when you take on the wrong client at the wrong pricing or the wrong value level, you get a really difficult client that can become a real pain in the in the rear end.
Yeah.
And then you're kind of thinking, is that worth it?
Hi everyone, I've got Jacqui here. She's a leadership coach, global speaker, and author who helps executives and leaders to move from execution to influence. She's worked with global companies, Macquarie Group, HSBC, Ernst& Young. Jacqui, thanks for joining us. And to start off with, I want to know from you, what is the single biggest challenge that you're currently facing in business or investments, and how are you addressing it?
Hi, Luke. Thanks so much for having me. My single biggest focus and or challenge at the moment is really as a new business owner myself. It's attracting and retaining the reoccurring revenue with clients. So making sure that I'm attracting the right clients in and really setting up my systems and processes so that because I'm a one-man band now, I can effectively service those clients and be as efficient as possible. So setting up automations, picking the right systems, and all of those things.
How's the transition been in terms of moving from employee to business?
Well, it's interesting because I've always worked for large global organisations. So when I transitioned 4 years ago into a smaller entrepreneurial organisation, it was a big leap. It was a huge leap going from like a global company to six people. And I thought, that was a leap of courage and a leap of faith for me. I proved that I could do it, that it worked, that I was an asset to that business. Moving, and I thought, at the time I was, working as a solo entrepreneur inside of that organization because I started to learn marketing, I started to learn sales, I really got inside the strategy and what it was like to be a leader inside of that organization. It's very different. I'm in charge of finding the systems. I'm in charge of, working out who I can rely on for support and all of those things. That transition has been quite challenging, actually.
Yeah, it's just so much involved in running your business as opposed to just being an employee. And I think a lot of people forget that. Jacqui, what is one challenge that changed everything in business for you?
I think really I've learnt alignment. So I've really learnt what it means to be in alignment. So one challenge that I was faced with this year was a slower economy, a slower market, people contracting on their spending. So training, for example, is a bit of a luxury item. So it's been a challenging 12 to 18 months, to be honest. So in the company that I was working with, that there was a lot of contraction happening, and it was still a lot of it was still trying to bring in that reoccurring revenue, getting those whale deals through. They were fewer and further between. And we actually shut down one of the major programs, which, probably saw the writing on the wall for me in terms of where my role was heading within that organisation. So I think for me it was about, and then when that program was going to be, it got cancelled, then it was going to relaunch again at the end of the year. I thought there's a bit of a misalignment here with where I feel aligned in that particular business. So I thought that was the writing on the wall. It was actually a gut feeling for me and probably some, fatigue in terms of change and, always aligning to new direction with under that particular leadership. So I think for me, it's more important for me to be aligned with what I want to do, where I want to go, my vision, my values, and I can absolutely do that for myself. So
Yeah,
that's
look, it sounds like a lot of changes over the last 12 months for you. I guess you're dealing with these with big corporations. How are you progressing and looking at, these companies or individuals within these companies and executives dealing with these changes?
yeah. What I'm noticing with the clients that I'm working with at the moment is there is a lot of growth happening in some organisations. So there's a lot of leaders who are feeling fatigued. They're feeling a little bit burnt out. They don't have a lot of time to reset and get their thoughts together and get clearer. There's some, management issues with certain staff that they report to them. And they've got huge goals and huge KPIs and targets to meet over the next quarter and the next financial year. So for them, there's a lot of pressure on. There's definitely a lot of pressure on their plate. So I love going in and supporting them get really clear around what is it that they need to achieve, and then how do we measure that as well.
Jacqui, what do you look for in a business partner before committing?
I really think values. Values is what number one, and then I think number two is making sure that you honour each other's worth and what each other bring to the table. I'm guilty of going in and underselling myself or like putting somebody else on a pedestal or a hierarchy. And I would, through lived and learned experience, I would highly recommend honouring your worth, making sure that it's a win-win, win for you, win for them, and a win for ecology, or that it's a sustainable win for everyone.
Yeah, it's really interesting around that. If you're like offering cheaper prices, sometimes I felt that you actually get, terrible kind of clients and outcomes from it. But if you're charging more, like people value that so much more. I don't know, is that your experience with it or is it something different?
I think I always find when you honour and hold your pricing and your value, that you will and a lot of the learning is around saying no. If that client isn't the right one for you, then it might mean in the short term a loss of revenue or a loss of, but sometimes when you take on the wrong client at the wrong pricing or the wrong value level, you get a really difficult client that can become a real pain in the rear end.
Yeah.
And then you're kind of thinking, is that worth it?
No, well, often isn't. So, time is money, right? And you could be chasing some other client that's much better at that same time. So, it's one for everybody to watch out for, and it's a pain point for a lot of startup businesses. Jacqui, how do you identify and evaluate emerging trends or opportunities to stay ahead of the curve, especially in what you've talked about before in regards to, businesses, thinking about what they're spending on and things like that?
I think actually, thinking about obviously keeping ahead of, what, like always finding somebody who's an expert in that area, whether it's a person or a book, or like making sure that you're educating yourself. I think learning and development and being an activated learner, so always like a lifelong learner, is something that I would highly recommend. Definitely training and educating your people, regardless of, the financial times. I think you're always going to, especially in a world with AI at the moment, there's a real, a real fear around AI, and and I'm actually seeing a lot of mixed responses with different groups and cohorts that I'm working with at the moment. Government are tending to not use AI. Some companies are building their own AI systems. Some use their phone, personal AI. Some can access AI in the workplace. So it's a really, really different spread of where AI can be used. And I think leadership has a lot to do with whether that's going to filter down and into what policies are created and what's going to filter down. And then on the other hand, so we've got AI on one hand that's going to empower and make things, it's going to be, like an assistant for you. It's going to, depending on what context, what role, what outcomes, and what you plug into it, is going to support you in your role. And then on the other hand, there's this soft leadership skills. So a LinkedIn study up until 2030, I think, is really looking at, emotional intelligence, communication, leadership, all of these softer, how do we be more adaptable and agile and all of these things. So I think we need to balance both worlds and make sure that we're keeping ahead of the times in terms of educating ourselves, jumping onto AI, learning as much as you can about it. I don't care if you're, nearing the end of your career. I think you need to be educated in what it is, how to use it, how it's going to impact you.
Excellent. So, in terms of the podcast, which is a business investing playbook, what are three actionable items to recommend the listeners do over the next 90 days to really push up their growth and learning?
Next 90 days, I think really looking at this time of year is not a time to necessarily wind down, but what activities can you do to really activate what could, really boost your 2026? Calling those clients, nurturing them, checking in, what else? Planning out your 2026 calendar, mapping out your holidays. So making sure that you know what you've got on for January, February, but you also know that you're having some downtime as well. So really getting that balance created. So not just being in that reactivity that this time of year can really generate, because I know Christmas is coming. It can be a reactive time. There's lots going on with kids at school and end of year activities, and sometimes our mindset can really think, well, we have to achieve something by 31 December or when office shutdown is, but that's not necessarily the case. If you can rewire your brain and think, well, how can I actually gear up, and what will my future self thank me for by the activities that I start to do between now and then?
Yeah, absolutely. And you talked about the soft skills, so it sounded like that's where it was, moving towards in this period, especially the next month or two during that December, January period that we have right now. Finally, Jacqui, what is one word that you would provide as a legacy to help others who want to build beyond financial success?
I think presence. So really being present in the moment, like how can I be grateful for what I've got right now, and how can I really celebrate the successes that I have achieved this year or to date. Often we'll get attached to an outcome that I've got to be at this certain level, or I've got to have this certain amount of stuff or things by this point in time or this time of the year or whatever it might be. So really just bringing presence to what you're doing and looking around and being really grateful for what, deeper relationships and quality time with people, and really bringing that presence to everything.
Yeah, super important. Jacqui, thanks so much for coming on the podcast, and hopefully everyone learns so much more out of Jacqui's experience, knowledge, and skills. And we'll be having more episodes coming online soon. Thank you.
Thanks, Luke. Thanks. That was fun.